was the last time you had an original idea? Okay, maybe that was a little harsh. Okay, alright, let's try this again. Originality is a little hard to find nowadays, isn't it? There are a lot of ideas to go around, but still, only so many that we can come up with before eventually we have to start borrowing from each other. Not everything, obviously, I'm not talking about plagiarism here. No, I'm referring to more broad archetypes, similar settings, reoccurring character types, common themes, tropes. Take your generic cyberpunk, for instance, which tends to be set in a neon-infused urban hellscape featuring criminals, outcasts, creative visionaries, and other such anti-heroes, starring in an anti-corporate story that also manages to squeeze in a few questions about what it means to be human. That isn't to say that all cyberpunk has to follow these exact rules. Obviously there's a decent amount of variation, but change the formula too much, and at some point, you aren't dealing with cyberpunk anymore. What were once fresh, eye-catching aesthetics and new, thought-provoking ideas are now expected, predictable. They're tropes, essentially attached to the genre. Other tropes, though, are more isolated and individual, and can be used in any kind of story, if the writer so chooses. The most obvious example would be character archetypes. Classics like the mentor figure, more recent ones like the Starscream. The list is almost endless, much like this introduction will be if I don't hurry up. Don't worry, this isn't just a video talking about tropes. Oh, wait a minute. To get to the point, tropes are practically everywhere and basically inescapable. At this point, it's more of a matter of how, not if, you use them, whether or not they're played straight, subverted, or just completely deconstructed. And My Hero Academia is an interesting example in that it does all three. My hero. For those not in the loop, My Hero Academia, or Boku no Hero Academia, or just My Hero, or just Boku no Hero, or just Hero Aka, is a manga by Kohei Horikoshi, adapted into an anime of the same name, both currently ongoing as of the writing of this video. Hero Aka takes place in a world where superpowers and heroes have become normalized to the point where they are a completely natural part of society now. Said superpowers are now named Quirks, a sign of how normal things like extra limbs, pyrokinesis, and this are. And heroes are now seen as a hard-to-reach but not improbable career option, while still being heavily idolized, however, having come to very much dominate the public conscience of what is dubbed Hero Society. And it is from Hero Society where much of the plot and character driving the story forward comes from, and that includes the tropes that the series employs. As mentioned before, My Hero Academia uses its tropes in three different ways. Firstly is just by playing it straight, using the tropes and that's it, not too much thought given beyond that. Example, the main male and female characters have feelings for each other. Protagonist Izuku Midoriya basically falls for 𝒂�𒋼🀭🆑 immediately and literally too, now that I think about it. And although it takes a season or two, she is shown to return these feelings. Yeah, not much else. Moving on, we have Subversion, where you think a trope is going to play out straight, only for the piece of media to actually use those expectations to go in a completely different direction than expected. An example in Hero Aka would be the Todoroki family, and the character of 𝒂�🋼🀭🆑. Abuse subplots aren't anything new in fiction, and they aren't anything new in anime, but what My Hero does that's unusual is that it takes the bold risk of humanizing 𝒂�🖼🀑🆑. Oh, there's no getting around it. He's the root of all his family's suffering, and yet 🂍💪🀭 reflects, he evolves, he changes and develops. He's even the protagonist of his own mini-arc. He's humanized, not just through his attempts to redeem himself, but the combination of that with his continued grave failings as a parent and a hero. Now, you could debate how well this is handled, and people do, but this is a formula break. It's not something one would expect. It's a subversion of our expectations. And finally, deconstruction, where we take a trope, play it straight, and say, okay, then what? What happens when we take this trope and try and apply real-world logic to it? What happens when a society is built almost entirely around heroes, around idolizing them and treating them like celebrities? Well, the role of hero becomes more and more commercial. The term becomes less and less a description of character, and more a symbol of fame and status. More and more unsavory characters become heroes, drawn by the allure of celebrity and power. Yet the idolization continues, further corrupting what it means to be a hero. What happens when you take a larger-than-life, genuinely heroic, unbeatable figure like All Might and ask, what then? Society becomes far too dependent on them to enforce order, and the second they slack, stop for a minute, or just go entirely, that society risks complete collapse as crime rates skyrocket, no longer being suppressed by the single, all-watching eye. And even when he is around, even when he's saving 99.9% of people, he's still not perfect. He's still unable to save that 0.01%. And with how high expectations for heroes are, especially the one at the top, that 0.01% is going to feel all the more abandoned, all the more neglected by a society that feels that helping people is a job that should be done only by those who get paid to do it. What happens when you take a person who is pure evil, who hates everything around him, who sees no value in anything, who wants to see people die and society destroyed for no other reason than because he wants to, and ask, why? How could this kind of person come about? What kind of environment, kind of society could birth such a monster? You get Tomura Shigaraki. Tomura Shigaraki is one of the most openly, philosophically vapid main antagonists I've ever seen. His awe-inspiring mediocrity as a villain is so great, it is openly acknowledged by other characters in the story. When introduced, Shigaraki comes across as nothing more than a spoiled, entitled child throwing rocks at things he doesn't like, hoping they disappear. Mostly due to the fact that he's a spoiled, entitled child throwing rocks at things he doesn't like, hoping they disappear. He even comes with a kind of Trojan horse fake motive that he tries to pretend he has, but he barely gets past government-sponsored instrument of violence before All Might calls him out on his bullshit, exposing him as a man who has literally no morals whatsoever.
You think you can get away with being as violent as you want if you say it's for the sake of others. Well, you know what, All Might? That pisses me off. Why do people get to decide?
Nah, man. You just want to kill people, innit? Yeah, can't lie, get off on that shit. For God's sake, they even call him a man-child. At this point, they're almost being too self-aware. And it's not just his introduction. If anything, more attention is drawn to his failure as an effective antagonist afterwards, well into the second season, especially in comparison to someone like Stain, who was pre-packaged with his own moral code relevant to hero society, directly questioning and confronting the definitions of hero. But hang on, let's pause for a bit. That's a word I'd really like to focus on. Pre-packaged. Stain enters the story already set in his own convictions, having gone through the struggle of forming and coming to terms with them off-screen, much like most antagonists. Character development for villains isn't something that's generally expected. They are static characters. Not always, but usually. Their primary purpose, as said in the name, is to oppose the protagonist, to act as an obstacle for their development. You'll often hear sayings like, villains are the heroes of their own stories, but those stories are more often than not never told in full because they aren't the focus, they're not what the story is about. And that's what I ultimately find so interesting about Shigaraki. He isn't the main character of his own story that's mostly already happened off screen, and now we just watch his third act collide with the hero's journey. Shigaraki's story is told at the same time as Midoriya's. They're the protagonist of their own stories, the antagonist of the others, but both are the driving force of the same narrative. Midoriya starts off weak, quirkless, with strong feelings of justice and an admiration for heroes, but without the strength to do anything with them. It's only after a chance encounter with his idol that he is given the opportunity to live up to the ideals he respects, the opportunity to become Deku, the hero he was meant to be. Likewise, Shigaraki starts off aimless, impatient, childish, unable to focus his general loathing of everything under the sun into anything tangible, his early attacks essentially being spur-of-the-moment decisions driven purely by his hatred of All Might. It's only after his confrontation with people like Stain and Midoriya, as well as the loss of his master All for One forcing him to act on his own, does he begin to turn that hatred into true conviction, kickstarting his journey to becoming the monster he never should have been. It's a fascinating thing, watching him slowly grow up and develop in incremental ways, actually putting some forethought into his plans instead of instinctively doing whatever, selectively recruiting powerful villains instead of mass hiring a bunch of goons. Even something as simple as not losing his temper when Bakugo rejects his offer to join the League of Villains is a massive character moment for him. I'm aware of how low a bar that is, but with the context of his character and where he started, it's a huge step forward for him. It's honestly hard not to even be a little proud. As Shigaraki grows and develops as a person and a villain, seeds of his backstory are given, and we realize that his character is arguably even more so a reaction to hero society than Stain was. Tomura Shigaraki, originally Tenko Shimura, was the grandson of pro-hero Nana Shimura, All Might's predecessor. To focus on hero work and to prevent her family from getting hurt, she gave up her son to a foster family, forbidding her friends from ever getting involved, something that would prove to be disastrous. Growing up, her son deeply resented his mother and hero society at large for abandoning him, and when he grew up and started his own family, he took those feelings out on his youngest child, Tenko. Despite being, by all appearances, a lovely child, Tenko bore the brunt of his father's abuse because of his fascination with heroes, while the rest of his family, though sympathetic, did nothing to stop it. After a particularly bad night, Tenko's quirk, Decay, awoke suddenly and violently, leading to him accidentally killing his entire family. Alone and traumatized, he wandered the streets aimlessly, silently looking for help, only to be completely and deliberately ignored. Why? Well, look at him. He's fucking creepy. Ugh. Besides, it's not my job to help people. Eventually a hero will come and save him, like Ed Shaw or Maybe Endeavor or All Might, yeah? Yeah, it's not my problem, just let him be. Eventually a hero will come and save him. Right?
No one's come to save you, have they? You've had a hard life, Tenko Shimura. He'll be fine. Eventually the heroes will help. I'm sure that's what everyone thought as they looked away and ignored you. The world shouldn't be so unforgiving. You didn't do anything wrong.
Raised under the guidance of All for One, himself an example of the pure evil trope played mostly straight, Shigaraki had almost no choice to become the monster he is today. Except, even then, to call Shigaraki a monster is actually rather untrue, which to a few of you might be odd, and yeah, I get it. Of course, I'm not exactly going to blame a 5-year-old abuse victim for snapping and killing his family in an event completely out of his control, but afterwards, Shigaraki knowingly and consciously, directly and indirectly kills countless, and his goal to destroy society is rooted in an extreme, pathological hatred of the world around him. But at the heart of it is a very relatable, very human desire for self-expression and freedom. The freedom to be free of the past. The freedom to act as one pleases without judgment or fear. Freedom that Shigaraki wants for himself and his friends. Those who are abandoned by society at large, drawn to his side by a fellow cynicism in heroes, a shared resentment over being abandoned for not fitting in, and a similar desire to live unbeholden to the rules of others. My Hero Academia, the manga at least, appears to be entering its last major act, with both its protagonists currently entering new phases for their character arcs. Deku leaving school and embracing vigilantism as hero society crumbles around him, and Shigaraki struggling to throw off the continuing hold that All for One has on him. After their last violent clash, both characters will need to deal with their own internal issues before facing each other again. Whether to finally end the other, or to reach out a hand to help, well, that remains to be seen. Whatever the case, with how Shigaraki's been written, how his surface-level appearance as a vapid, shallow villain has been explored and elaborated upon, it'll be impossible to wrap up his story without addressing the issues that his deconstruction has brought to the surface. One of the most uniquely written villains I've seen in shonen anime. However Shigaraki's story ends, his character will no doubt be one I'll remember fondly. Thank you very much for watching. If you liked what you saw, then like, comment, subscribe, share, all that jazz. If you'd like to support me more directly, then feel free to make a one-time donation to my Ko-fi. Hope to see you next time.